Tensions on the North Korean peninsula are ratcheting up, with Pyongyang announcing it's conducted a successful H-bomb test. Donald Trump has hinted that a US strike on the North is possible.
Mr. President, will you attack North Korea?
So this is a very ominous message coming from the president, who posted online that all options are on the table when it comes to North Korea, and that he was in fact going to meet with his generals and a number of other military officials to discuss the crisis. Now, Mattis, his Secretary of Defense, recently stated that it's always a possibility to find a diplomatic solution to such a crisis, but Trump himself has already repeated that speaking with North Korea is not going to be effective. At the same time, we have a number of world powers, China and Russia, calling for all sides to show restraint, but Trump, it seems, is sticking to his guns and is going to continue to escalate the aggressive rhetoric that we've heard from him as of late.
They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen. North Korea better get their act together, or they're going to be in trouble like few nations ever have been in trouble in this world, okay? And this man will not get away with what he's doing, believe me.
Now, of course, this has already gone past just a war of words between Washington and Pyongyang. The U.S. has, of course, already bolstered its military presence in the region and continues to conduct drills with South Korea in the area, much to the displeasure of North Korea. And Trump received a lot of backlash for these comments, these aggressive comments he's been making recently, both abroad and at home. But on his side, the U.S. State Department did say that the way that Trump talks is just the only way to communicate with North Korea.
Is he exacerbating the
president spoke to him, to Kim Jong-un, in a language that Secretary Tillerson has said, and said this morning, in the kind of language that Kim Jong-un will understand.
But clearly, America's tactics have done nothing to quell tensions in the region. In fact, they seem to have escalated them, if anything. But it doesn't seem that America has any plans on the horizon to change their strategy with North Korea, leaving the rest of the world in fear that we could be getting pushed closer and closer to the brink of war.
Let's discuss the latest escalation of tensions in the region now with Charles Shoebridge. He's a security analyst and former UK Army officer. Very good evening to you, Charles. I'm going to start, I hope you forgive me for this, with kind of a worst-case scenario. Recently, Senator Lindsey Graham said that if there was conflict with North Korea, the North Koreans would fire missiles upon South Korea, possibly Japan, and that thousands of people would die, that the US would be doing all the damage, though, upon North Korea. What do you think the actual capabilities are of North Korea at the moment? How far can they fire missiles, and what kind of payload can they deliver?
Yes, it's a good quote to use because Senator Lindsey Graham, of course, has been one of those that has been more hawkish in saying that although that would happen, if there was a war, then America should still consider that because there would be thousands of deaths, as he put it, and the responsibility of that would lie with North Korea. At the moment, the situation is that although North Korea poses a threat to its near neighbours, it has just demonstrated, it would appear, a greatly increased capability in terms of the yield of its nuclear weapons. It claims that this weapon would be capable of being placed, it's being small enough to being placed on a long-range missile, an ICBM, that could presumably reach, as we know from their previous tests, their missiles can reach Japan, possibly could reach other targets, including Guam and places like that of American interest in the Pacific. But really the main threat, because that militarization claim hasn't yet been proven, but undoubtedly in the relatively near future that will become true. And so as time goes on, North Korea, if it is a threat, becomes more of a threat to a greater number of countries. But in a way, ironically, the main threat that is preventing or would prevent an attack on these facilities and on North Korea generally isn't necessarily the fear of it using nuclear weapons. It is the fear that has long been in place that it has such overwhelmingly powerful conventional forces, particularly in terms of ordinary conventional artillery, that if America attacked, there would be retaliation, not necessarily against America in the first instance, but that there could be absolute devastation wrought not just on South Korea, but also on the capital itself, that could kill itself many tens of thousands. And it could be that that is what Lindsey Graham was talking about, rather than the specific nuclear threat of retaliation that undoubtedly will become more apparent in the future.
Interesting. And just one more thing on the missile threat, because I note down that the US has, as I understand, missile defence systems in South Korea, these THAAD missile systems. Just how much infrastructure is there in place to shoot down any missiles the North Koreans might fire? How much of a threat are they in terms of their missile capability?
The problem is that, well, first of all, there's a lot of literature to show that the anti-missile capabilities of the US, as indeed of Israel using similar systems and other systems that are designed to shoot down incoming projectiles, that their capabilities have been consistently overstated. Perhaps the majority of launches from a country such as North Korea could be intercepted, but of course the problem is that if you've got a situation where one or more projectiles, missiles are carrying nuclear weapons, you can't afford even one to get through. And that is what is going to dominate, I think, particularly military thinking in respect of tackling this North Korean issue. And of course, that is the essence of deterrence, which is why powers such as Russia, the United Kingdom, US, China, and so on, possess nuclear weapons, because there's always the danger that one will get through no matter how sophisticated a defense system, and that balance of deterrence then is, in theory at least, designed to keep the peace. And arguably, many would argue has done so, many would say the opposite perhaps, in terms of its relevance to peacekeeping. But in terms of the North Korean threat, of course it's a great conundrum for the world generally, and certainly for the region, because in attacking North Korea, which may prove to be the only way to stop this program, they may well actually instigate the kind of conflict and destruction, perhaps even nuclear destruction, which these strikes were at least publicly intended to prevent. If America and other countries were to attack, first of all, it would be very difficult to take out this program, I think, because it's so well advanced now. And secondly, there will be a lot of redundancy and replication in place in the program, so that if one facility is wiped out, perhaps others can take over. And also they are very well protected and hardened, perhaps underground facilities in any case. But secondly, of course, as we've mentioned, the main problem with carrying out some kind of military strike is the threat of retaliation, not against America necessarily at this stage, perhaps years down the line or even months down the line, but certainly now the very grave threat that would exist to North Korea's neighbour, South Korea, and particularly the capital.
What do you think that Kim Jong-un is actually trying to achieve here?
What he's trying to achieve, I think, is what he's made clear that he's trying to achieve, and I think not to be supportive of him necessarily, but I think to a large degree he has achieved that, and that is that he's trying to achieve security for his regime, for his government. The United States has repeatedly, not just under Trump, but of course in previous administrations as well, have repeatedly threatened North Korea, certainly from the perspective of the North Korean government, in terms of not just the rhetoric, the kind of rhetoric that we've seen very recently from Trump, for example, but to be honest, it's not greatly different from the kind of rhetoric we've seen, at least more subtly put, from previous US leaders towards North Korea. And also in terms of the actual demonstrations of intent that the United States have carried out increasingly in the last few months, but again have gone back certainly over the last two administrations in terms of very large-scale exercises, deployment of missile systems and so on, all of which America, if it was on its borders, would undoubtedly see as some kind of threat. And certainly North Korea has stated it sees as a threat. And also, if we look at the past, certainly 15 years of history of American foreign policy, it's certainly very arguable that American foreign policy has acted in a way, in a more general sense, to make nuclear proliferation more likely. And the simple reason is that when you look at countries such as Libya, Iraq, that gave up their weapons of mass destruction, those countries then arguably suffered conquest and destruction from the United States as a result. That isn't necessarily an argument that I would support. There are certainly elements of that argument that are supportable, and it's certainly an arguable case. But what's important here is really the nub of the question you asked, which is from the perspective of other powers around the world. They see United States policies as aggressive, as expansionist, and as a threat. And they see also that countries that have nuclear or other weapons of mass destruction deterrents don't get attacked by the United States. Those that don't have these deterrents do get attacked. And this, I think, is one of the consequences that in due course will be seen as a result of one of the results of American foreign policy, the West foreign policy actually, over the last 10 to 15 years.
Charles, I found that a fascinating analysis. I really appreciate you coming on to speak to us. Charles Shoebridge, security analyst, former UK Army officer.